Imagine this. You're in a major city, iconic, bustling, and suddenly real estate investments just freeze up.
Yeah.
And your local grocery store, the one you rely on, starts talking about leaving, packing up.
It sounds dramatic, doesn't it? But what kind of policy, even one with good intentions, could actually cause that kind of reaction?
That's what we're diving into today. We're looking at some really fascinating and definitely contentious proposals from a major U.S. city.
And these aren't just ideas on paper anymore. They've already triggered, well, some powerful immediate ripple effects.
Right. We've been looking into what happens when these big policy ideas, the ones meant to help, run smack into the messy realities of city economics.
And human behavior, too, which is a huge factor. Plus, cultural foundations. It gets complex fast.
So our mission today is to unpack these specific proposals. We're talking rent freezes, city-run grocery stores, the works.
And we want to explore why, despite the stated goals, the projections suggest these plans could lead somewhere very different.
Exactly. We'll look at how the market reacted, like instantly. Then dig into the economic arguments behind that reaction.
And even touch on some of those bigger cultural insights that sort of explain the dynamics.
Yeah, get ready. This might challenge some assumptions about how cities really tick.
Okay, so where do we start?
Let's start with what some are calling the Zoran effect. It's happening in New York City right now.
Okay.
Basically, shares for big companies tied to NYC real estate, they dropped sharply.
Okay. And that's tied to a political proposal.
Directly. It's linked to feels about a mayoral candidate's plan for a rent freeze. This candidate, Zoran Mamani,
Right, I've heard the name.
he's promised, if elected, an immediate rent freeze for all tenants in stabilized apartments.
Wow, all of them. That's ambitious.
It is. And his vision is bigger still.
Hi.
Use every city resource possible to build more housing, try to bring down rents overall.
The goal be.
To tackle the housing crisis head on. It's seen as the #1 reason working families are, leaving the city.
Okay, so on the surface, it sounds direct. A big solution for a big problem.
It does. But what's striking is how fast the market got nervous. Just the idea of the policy sent signals.
That tells you something. And when you dig into the economics, well, the landlord's perspective comes up immediately. Maintaining a building, especially somewhere like New York, it costs a lot. I mean, a lot.
We're talking plumbing, heating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Plumbing, heat, floors, walls, electricity, plus city taxes, which are significant, and permits for everything. It's constant.
And you need someone to manage all that, right?
Absolutely. You need a superintendent. That's a salary you have to pay.
Yeah.
Someone to run the place, fix things, make sure you're following all the city laws, which isn't simple.
Okay, so those are the running costs. What about things like damages? Doesn't the security deposit cover that?
Well, yes and no. A
Yeah.
security deposit is usually for major damage, like, someone puts a hole in the wall, obvious stuff. But it doesn't cover general wear and tear. The building just getting older, needing updates, needing repairs, eventually needing a full remodel. That comes out of the operating budget.
So if the rent money coming in is frozen or doesn't cover those ongoing costs.
Then the owner has a serious problem. A critical choice, really. Do they dip into savings? Do they cut back on maintenance? What gives?
And this isn't just theoretical. We're seeing this play out.
We are. In places like New York and also LA, you're seeing owners of larger buildings actually choosing not to rent out empty units.
Wait, why would they do that? Isn't an empty unit worse?
You'd think so, but they've done the math. They've crunched the numbers and found that the cost of having a tenant, when you factor in maintenance, potential issues, wear and tear, compliance headaches, it's actually more than the rent they can legally charge or expect to collect consistently.
So they just leave them empty. That seems counterintuitive to fixing a housing shortage.
It is, but it's the economic reality they're facing. It leads to this weird situation and exodus of available units, making the shortage worse.
Wow, okay. And you mentioned consistency of collecting rent. COVID must have thrown a wrench in things there.
Oh, absolutely. Think back to when rent payments weren't really being enforced in many places.
Yeah.
We saw examples, actual cases of apartment owners, some living out of state, like in Florida, who almost lost their buildings.
Because they couldn't collect rent.
Exactly. They couldn't collect enough rent to cover their mortgage, their taxes, their basic operating costs. They were right on the edge of having to sell.
So even a temporary measure meant to help tenants could push landlords over the edge.
It illustrates how policies, even well-intentioned ones like a freeze or non-enforcement, can unintentionally cripple the ability to just keep the building running, which can lead to owners selling, maybe to developers who convert them, or just letting the building decline. ultimately fewer decent places to live.
And that brings up another point. People sometimes say, look at all these empty houses. Why don't we put homeless people in them?
Right, it sounds simple.
But based on what you're saying about maintenance.
It's way more complex. An unmaintained house doesn't just sit there nicely, it deteriorates fast.
How so?
Think about water damage, for instance. A small leak can become a huge problem. You need professional dehumidifiers, big fans, remediation. It's not just letting it air out. Mold, structural issues. It requires constant and often expensive upkeep.
So just putting someone in an empty, unmaintained space isn't really a solution.
Not a sustainable one, no. It requires ongoing investment.
Which leads to the bigger challenge. Affordable housing. Everyone agrees we need it, but building it seems incredibly hard.
It is. You run into the NMBUI problem, not in my backyard.
Yeah. People support affordable housing in theory, just not near them.
Precisely. Communities often fight against new affordable projects, making it tough to find locations and get approvals.
And then there's the actual cost of building anything.
Huge factor. Labor isn't cheap, nor should it be. Construction workers need to earn a living wage, especially in expensive cities. You hear figures, sometimes, like it costing $100,000 in labor alone to build one affordable unit. That's not materials or land, just the work.
So if building costs are high and the potential rent income is deliberately kept low or frozen, how do you pay for it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The funding gap. Where does that money come from?
The argument often points towards taxes, right? Other people's money, as the saying goes.
It does. But then you hit another potential snag. If you significantly raise taxes on higher earners or businesses to fund these projects,
They might leave.
that's the concern. The risk is that they relocate, taking their tax dollars, their companies, their jobs with them, which could actually shrink the city's overall tax base, making it even harder to fund everything else, including the housing initiatives. It's a real paradox.
So let's connect this back. If you're out there listening, maybe you're looking for an apartment, maybe you own property, maybe you just live and work in a city. What does this all mean?
Well, if you're looking for housing, policies like a rent freeze could, paradoxically, mean fewer available apartments in the long run. Or the quality of the apartments available might go down as owners cut back on non-essential maintenance.
And if you own property.
Your ability to cover costs and maintain your investment could be squeezed. It might force some tough decisions about upkeep or even whether to stay in the rental market.
And for everyone else.
Look, these market shifts aren't isolated. They ripple out. They can affect local businesses that rely on residents. They can impact jobs, the overall economic health, and, frankly, the vibrancy of the city.
It really highlights how tricky it is to balance affordability with keeping the whole system functioning. There are major practical challenges.
Definitely. No easy answers.
Okay, let's shift gears. There's another big policy proposal causing waves, this time involving grocery stores.
That's right. This one's also generating some strong reactions, particularly from existing store owners.
We're hearing about owners, like the Katsidas family, who run well-known local grocery stores in NYC, actually threatening to leave the city.
Yes, pulling out entirely. And it's a direct response to a different mayoral candidate's plan.
Which is?
The idea is to open city-run grocery stores.
Government-run supermarkets.
Essentially, yes. And the core idea is pretty radical. These stores would focus only on keeping prices low. They would explicitly not aim to make a profit.
How would they manage that? Lower prices usually mean lower margins.
Well, the plan suggests they'd cut overhead significantly. They wouldn't have to pay rent or property taxes because they'd be on city property.
Okay. Big savings right there.
Huge. And they'd plan to buy and sell goods basically at wholesale prices, centralize their warehousing and distribution to be more efficient, and partner with neighborhoods for sourcing.
How is this being framed politically?
It's being pitched as redirecting public money. The argument is the city already spends millions subsidizing private grocery stores. And the proposal points out that many of those subsidized private stores aren't even required to accept things like SNAP or WIC, the food assistance programs. So the idea is, let's take that money and create a real public option for affordable fresh food instead.
Okay, but the no profit part, that sounds like a major challenge to existing businesses.
That's exactly where the pushback comes. The concept of no profit is being challenged based on what profit actually means for a small business owner.
Like a local corner store, a bodega.
Exactly. For that owner, profit isn't about buying a yacht. It's about paying their own rent at home. It's about, affording piano lessons for their daughter, paying for gas. It's their livelihood.
It's the basic income they need to survive and support their family.
Right. So when the city proposes to come in and sell goods at artificially deflated prices, essentially subsidized by taxpayers,
No private business can compete with that.
that's the argument. How can you compete with someone who doesn't need to make money, doesn't pay rent, doesn't pay property tax? In NYC, you've got something like 15,000 convenience stores.
Yeah.
Most are small, independent shops.
Operating on thin margins already, I imagine.
Incredibly thin. We're talking maybe 3% profit margin for many of them. They are really vulnerable to shifts in the market.
So what's the predicted outcome if these city stores open?
The fear is a downward spiral. If you take away even a small fraction of their business, say 1% or maybe 4%, according to some analyses,
That could be enough to sink some?
for many operating essentially paycheck to paycheck, yes, it could force closures, widespread closures.
And if the private stores close?
Then you risk creating food deserts, large areas of the city where people suddenly have very limited access to fresh food.
Because the corner store or the local grocer is gone.
Exactly. And the prediction then becomes you might end up with only a handful of these government-run stores, which might not be enough to serve everyone conveniently, leading potentially to...
Food lines. Like literally people lining up for groceries.
That's the stark warning. Food lines or bread lines for basic necessities because the private infrastructure has been dismantled.
Wow. That's a pretty dystopian image. Are there other concerns?
Well, there's the analogy that's been drawn comparing it to other government-run services.
Oh.
One comparison was, imagine if employees from the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, were put in charge of running a grocery store.
Oof. Okay, I see the implication.
The implication is potential inefficiency, maybe negligence. The specific example used was finding 3-month expired milk on the shelves.
Suggesting a risk to public health if there's no profit motive driving quality control and efficiency.
That's the concern raised, lack of accountability when profit isn't a factor. And they also point out that even some existing private grocery stores that receive subsidies already look, quote, like a bomb went off in there.
Raising questions about whether just throwing public money at the problem works without market competition.
Exactly. It suggests subsidies alone don't guarantee quality or efficiency. Competition seems to be a key ingredient.
So again, thinking about the listener, how could this potentially impact your daily life, your neighborhood, your access to food?
It really forces you to weigh the trade-offs. Is the promise of lower prices on some items worth the risk of maybe losing your local convenience store?
Or having less choice overall, maybe lower quality.
Potentially. It's that balance between potentially lower prices via subsidy versus a thriving, diverse, competitive local food economy. It's a complex calculation with real impacts on how people live and eat in a city.
It's fascinating how these policy debates, whether it's housing or groceries, seem to tap into something deeper than just economics.
They really do. When you peel back the layers, you often find they reveal fundamental assumptions about how societies work, what drives people, and what foundations are necessary for things to function smoothly.
It's not just about the policy, it's about the underlying human element.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
culture, the behavior, the knowledge that people bring.
That makes me think about the value of practical knowledge, like skills people actually have.
It's incredibly important and sometimes overlooked in grand policy schemes. There's this interesting anecdote
Yeah.
about a migrant from Honduras who apparently had been to Buffalo Wild Wings like 75 times.
Okay. Specific. Where's this going?
Well, the thought experiment is, imagine that person bringing that practical knowledge, how to make really good deep-fried chicken wings, the different sauces, how the system works, to a place with a very low GDP, say South Sudan.
They could actually teach people, start a small business.
Exactly. They could potentially spark real economic activity just based on applying a proven consumer concept. It's bottom-up, practical knowledge meeting a potential demand.
That's a cool way to think about it. It's not some abstract economic theory. It's just knowing how to make good wings.
And compare that to trying to implement a massive top-down, untested government program. Sometimes the simplest applications of existing knowledge are more powerful.
It reminds me of those thought experiments about going back in time.
How so?
Like, imagine going back 500 years in Europe and just explaining basic things we take for granted. How a magnifying glass works, or water displacement.
Or the concept of zero, which was a huge intellectual leap.
Right. Even seemingly simple applied knowledge could be completely revolutionary back then, sparking massive change.
And there are people doing this today, in a way. There's apparently a business model used by some ultra-wealthy individuals.
Okay.
They look at apps or services that are already hugely successful in the U.S., things that have worked for years.
Like popular apps on smartphones.
Exactly. And given that smartphone use is pretty high now in many developing nations, maybe 60, 70%,
They just copy the idea.
they replicate the proven system. Adapt it slightly for the local market, sure, but they're not inventing something new and untested. They're taking a known success and transplanting it and making millions doing it.
Because it's less risky than trying a completely novel, untested social or economic experiment.
Precisely. They're leveraging existing proven knowledge and systems.
This also seems connected to discussions around immigration and culture. That phrase, we're a nation of immigrants.
Yeah, that phrase comes up a lot. And one perspective we encountered challenges the underlying assumption
It is.
that the phrase sometimes implies all immigrants are interchangeable, that where they come from or what they believe doesn't really matter for the country they're joining.
Okay. And the counter-argument.
Is that culture matters a lot. Where someone comes from, their values, their norms. It does play a significant role in how they integrate and how society functions.
So this perspective pushes back on the idea that culture is irrelevant.
It does. There's a viewpoint quoted that basically says, if someone comes to America intending to fundamentally change America into something else, then maybe they shouldn't come.
That's a strong statement. It emphasizes protecting the existing societal structure and values.
Yes, the idea that those underlying structures and values are critical for the nation's identity and function, and that integration means largely adopting them, not replacing them.
Are there examples of how culture gets transferred even in unexpected ways?
There are some striking ones. For instance, cases of British youth, who were actually Kenyan nationals, getting deported from the UK back to Nairobi.
Okay, what happened?
They reportedly set up London-style street gangs. They're roadmen, they're called, and apparently became quite dominant, basically replicating the gang culture they knew from the UK.
Wow, so they imported that specific cultural structure.
Exactly. And another, maybe lighter example,
Yeah.
UK deportees sent to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania.
Yeah.
They apparently missed good coffee so much they set up a sort of fake Starbucks because that was the coffee culture they were used to and desired.
Uh-huh. Okay, so it shows how cultural norms, desires, even business ideas travel with people.
Definitely. These aren't just abstract ideas. They show how deeply culture shapes behavior, creates new social dynamics, even drives little pockets of economic activity. The transfer is real.
So tying this all together, how do these bigger ideas about culture, about practical knowledge, connect back to those specific policies like rent freezes or city-run grocery stores?
Well, it prompts us to ask, what assumptions are baked into those policies? Are policymakers fully considering the human element, the cultural context, the real-world incentives and knowledge people act on?
Are they assuming a certain kind of behavior that might not match reality?
Potentially? Or are they underestimating the importance of existing systems, existing knowledge, existing cultural norms that might be disrupted in unpredictable ways? It challenges us to look beyond the policy document and consider the full, complex human system it's interacting with.
So we've really unpacked a lot today. We looked at these proposals, intended to help people more affordable housing, cheaper groceries.
Noble goals, certainly.
But we've also seen, through the lens of these analyses, the potential for some really significant, maybe negative, unintended consequences.
Yeah, from the real estate market instantly reacting to fears of local stores closing down.
And even these broader questions about culture and knowledge transfer. It's clear there are no simple fixes here.
Not at all. These explorations really force us to confront the delicate balance, that tension between wanting the government to intervene and solve problems.
And the incredibly complex, often unpredictable way markets actually work and how people actually behave. The dynamics of incentives.
It's a constant tightrope walk.
So as you, our listener, think about all this, maybe chew on this question. When we aim to solve big societal problems, how well do we really understand all the ripples?
The hidden costs, the complex human behaviors, the cultural currents that will ultimately shape whatever outcome we get.
And what happens when a really well-intentioned idea runs up against not just an economic theory, but fundamental economic realities or those deeply ingrained cultural patterns?
Yeah. What happens then? It's something worth thinking about long after this deep dive ends.